normal plan. So thank you for being here. Good morning. My name is Ryan Paul. I teach history here at SUU, and I'm the director of Eccles Apex. On behalf of myself and the Eccles Apex team, Lauren Bird, Kayla Marsh, and Elena Moreno, I'd like to welcome you to Get Back to the Counter. I want to extend a special welcome to Springville High School social science teacher Robert Lister and his students who traveled all the way down to Cedar City from Springville for this. Let's give them a round of applause for their journey. Thank you, thank you. I'd also like to thank the Eccles Foundation for their generous and continuous support of this series, the Gerald All Sherritt Library, the Iron County America 250 Commission, Melinda Funstein, Danica Suberville, and the Provost's Office for making this event possible. I'd also like to remind you that today's conversation will continue this afternoon at 3 p.m. on Thunder 91.1 and on the Apex Radio Hour podcast. Her Freedom Rider mugshot has been called one of the most iconic in American history. By the time she was 23 years old, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland participated in over 50 sit-ins and demonstrations, including the Freedom Rides, the Jackson Woolworth sit-in, the March on Washington, the Meredith March, and the Selma to Montgomery March. Her path has crossed some of the biggest names in the civil rights movement: the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, John Lewis, Diane Nash, and Julian Bond, to name a few. Her son Loki Mulholland is an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker, author, activist, and, of course, son of civil rights icon Joan Mulholland. His work has received over 40 Telly Awards, and his films on race and social justice issues have won 20 Best Documentary Awards. Loki is the author of multiple books, including She Stood for Freedom and Get Back to the Counter. His films have appeared on Showtime, PBS, and Amazon, where The Uncomfortable Truth has been viewed over 3 million times. I should note that we have copies of Get Back to the Counter and the children's picture book, She Stood for Freedom, beautifully illustrated by Charlotte Johnson, for sale in the lobby. And Miss Joan and Loki will be holding a book signing there this afternoon after the presentation. They've also provided these amazing mugshots of Joan that are available for free if out there on the table as well. It is now my pleasure to welcome Joan and Loki Mulholland to Southern Utah University and to the Eccles Apex stage.
I think audio's on. There we go. All right. Is that working? That's working. All right. Well, good afternoon. Oh, yeah, okay. Is it still morning? It's still morning. Good morning. Okay, we're from the South, and when we say good morning, you say, there we go, one more time. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, there we go. Well said. Thank you for creating this little buffer space,
And then
Brian.
we say, how y'all?
How y'all, yeah. But I appreciate creating this buffer between my mom and I. I'm right out of striking distance, so this is good. Yeah,
But you're not out of throwing distance.
yeah. That whole nonviolence thing that ended when she had children. So.
I would say, boy, take off your belt and hand it to me and bend over.
Yeah, love taps, right?
Love taps,
Is
yeah.
it? I'm trying to get this. There it goes. Okay. Well, I want to start off by, we have some video clips we're going to share as well to kind of give context to what we're talking about. Not everyone knows all the dynamics of the civil rights movement and what she was involved in, but this is her story. But I want to take you back first to 1950s and 60s. This is when my mother was growing up, and her friends talking about living, experiencing segregation in Jim Crow. So I'm going to play that first.
In the 40s, in these German-occupied countries, if a Jew walking on the sidewalk did not get off the sidewalk when a German was coming and take his cap off, he was risking his life. So we had that same thing over here.
I always wondered why I had to go through the back door of the public library, why I could not go into the stacks to get my own books, why I had to go to the colored water fountain.
In Sears, I can remember white ladies and colored women bathrooms. You could not sit at Cress's counters. We used to go downtown and to buy candy or something. We couldn't sit at the counter.
We couldn't even go downtown and eat in a lot of the restaurants downtown in D.C.
Let's say we were supposedly equals. We were being treated that way, and I suddenly pissed off this white person. They had all kinds of things at their disposal to do me in, and there was nothing I could do about it.
He said, you ran that light. My dad said, no, sir, I didn't run the light, it was yellow. Morris, I said to you, you ran that light. My dad didn't say anything. And he looked at us in the back seat, and I guess we looked like a nice little family. And he said, Morris, you like a good so I'm gonna let you off this time.
It was a separate and unequal society, basically buttressed by local customs and laws.
But you know, that was just the way things were. And you want to go, what do you mean that's the way things were?
I met whites all over who had questions raised. I later met blacks who, when they had questions raised, their parents had to tell them, it may be wrong, but don't you try to do anything about it. This is in God's hands. Here's how you protect yourself. Maybe you shouldn't ride the bus so much if that upsets you.
Your parents did that, but they also told you that it would come to an end because it was wrong. Anything that's that wrong can't last.
Now, the guy who was from D.C. that was speaking,
Reverend Green.
Reverend Green, when he was in high school, he had a little singing group, and he was the lead singer. And guess who his backup man was? Marvin Gaye.
So that was just the world that y'all grew up in.
Yep.
But what Reuben said, I think is pretty profound.
Yeah, and Reuben, oh, ladies, was he a good-looking guy on campus? The best-looking guy.
Really?
He really was the best-looking. Quite the ladies' man.
Oh, okay, Mom. All right.
I just looked at him.
Uh-huh.
That's all.
And he also became the first black Supreme Court justice in the state of Mississippi.
True.
Yes, yes.
He's good looks, you've heard on that.
Okay. So, circling back around to what he actually said, so you weren't distracted by his looks, but, you know, is that anything that wrong can't last, right? And it didn't because you and your friends decided to do something about it.
We did.
But
we took direct action.
Direct action. And you're gonna see, you know, the photos and everything else and part of these amazing stories, but I think what a lot of people miss is that your story doesn't start with the Freedom Rides. It starts when you're 10 years old and you're visiting your grandmother in Georgia.
Yeah. And it was just a little dirt road town, company-owned logging place. Train track ran down the middle of the dirt road through town. And my playmate every summer, we decided to sneak off and go where we were not supposed to go, down the even narrower dirt road that went through the colored section of town. Now, remember, back in the day, colored was the polite term. It wasn't like it is now. So we snuck off and went down the road, past these houses that were even more rickety and all than the ones in the white section. Pitiful. And people saw these two little white girls coming, and this was before Emmett Till, folks. And they just made themselves scarce. If anything happened, they didn't want to know a thing about us being there. They went probably into their outhouse or hid behind their laundry they were hanging up. It was creepy. Then we got to the colored school. It was a one-room shack, never had an ounce of paint on it, no glass or screens in the windows, just wooden shutters. The door was ajar. You could see the pot-bellied stove for heat. No running water, no electricity. Pitiful. And I knew out the other end of town was the fanciest building for miles and miles around. A brick school for the white kids with all the amenities, you know, running water and everything. And I knew this was not right. This was not doing what we had learned in Sunday school about treating people the way you want to be treated and loving your neighbor as yourself. And I knew then, but I couldn't have put it in words, that when I had the chance to do something to make the South, didn't care about the Yankees, folks, but to make the South the best it could be for everybody, I would seize the moment. And that came when I was in college and the sit-ins got going. And now we have the police in here. But I'll be good. I won't get arrested this time, hopefully.
He's on your side today, Mom. We're grateful he's here.
Hello, officer.
Oh, you completely threw me off. Oh, well, you were saying, you didn't care about those Yankees. Now, we're in Utah.
You're Yankees.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. All right. Because I think Ryan had said that, no, we're Westerners.
Anybody outside the South is a Yankee.
Right. Okay. Just to be fair.
Just to be honest.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I mean.
But I'm not prejudiced.
No, I mean.
Yankees have rights too.
Yes. I mean, there was actually a gentleman who courted you at one point in time, and you decided he wanted to move out of the South. And you're like, well, I'm not leaving. So
I can't remember who that was.
I might have been Leonard. But you're like, I'm not leaving the South. So you turned down a proposal because you didn't want to leave the South. That's how adamant you are about those Yankees. But nonetheless, that's a little later in the story, I guess. We won't actually get to that part.
Oh, good.
But yes. But so you do get the chance. Now, before we get to that particular chance, which is when you go to college, you have this unique situation that takes place during Brown versus Board when you're in high school. I think it was junior high, high school, and
high school.
High school, at your church.
Well,
this is in Arlington, Virginia, by the way.
Which is the South.
Yes.
Everything was completely segregated by law. So, the youth minister, we had Sunday evening meetings. The youth minister told us that next week there would be some colored students come and join us for our youth meeting. We had, discussions on something related, how Christianity related, but we also had a spaghetti dinner every week. Well, it was absolutely against the law for us to sit and eat together. So we had to keep it a secret. We only, we couldn't tell our parents. God forbid we tell our parents, where we'd go. And the police could show up and arrest us, sir, officer. The police could show up and arrest us. The rowdies could show up and cause a lot of trouble. And we could even be locked out of the building by some member of the board of trustees or whatever that had a key. So we kept it a secret.
And the American Nazi Party was just...
Oh, the American Nazi Party had the headquarters about 2 blocks away, and the Klan was still active in the area. Well, it's still active today. But anyway, we kept it a secret, had a good time, can't remember what we talked about. And we even did it a second time. And few of us stayed in touch for a number of years.
What was the goal of this?
The goal was to sort of help prepare us for school integration, to give it a chance for the black students and white students, a few of us, to get to know each other, just a little bit, so that if we ended up in the same classroom or the same school, we'd already have somebody who was a friend, sort of.
And this is interesting. Well, did you ever tell your parents, by the way?
Of course I didn't tell my parents. I think most of you younger folks understand about not telling your parents. And he never told me everything, I'm sure.
Okay, but like 40, 50 years later.
No, I didn't tell him.
So if you need to keep a secret, it's in the vault.
He asked my sister about it when he was making a film. She never had heard about this secret meeting.
Yeah.
Decades later.
Decades later, yeah.
She was surprised.
Yeah, so was I. But you do get your chance, and to really get involved in the movement, and this is when you go to Duke University.
Yeah, I went to Duke because Mama insisted I go to someplace important. I wanted to go to this little church school out in Ohio where my Sunday school teacher and her husband went. You've probably heard of the husband. His name was John Glenn. You've heard of him? We'd sit together in church, too. And I wanted to go to their college. Mama said, oh, no. No one's ever heard of that place. You're going to go somewhere important. She's probably afraid it'd be integrated, which it probably was. And I had to go to Duke University. Well, I argued with Mama for a while, and then, gave up. At least going there will get me away from Mama. Some of you've had that feeling, get away from Mama. And that was Mama's big mistake, because the sit-in started my freshman year, and before you knew it, our Presbyterian chaplain there said some colored students are going to come who are involved in the demonstrations in town are going to come talk to us next week about what's going on. Same thing as before. Don't tell anybody unless you're sure they'd want to come. The rowdies could show up and cause trouble. The police could show up and arrest us. Or the administration might even lock us out of the building. So, kept it quiet. And these students came and spoke quite well they were from North Carolina College, as it was called then. They came and explained in moral and legal terms, very eloquently, about the demonstrations in town, and then they invited us to join them. So first that led to the picket line, then it led to the lunch counters and the jail twice, and to the courtroom, and then it ultimately led to the United States Supreme Court, which ruled that demonstrating was freedom of speech. The police couldn't just come in and arrest you. The manager had to close the business down, turn out all the lights. Then the management could ask the police to come in and arrest you if you refused to leave.
Oh, and Duke University was beside itself.
Yeah, Duke.
They couldn't understand how a white Southern woman could be involved in the civil rights movement, and actually thought you were mentally ill and took you in for mental evaluation, right?
Yeah, we had to get some counseling and what have you. And I found out just probably 2 years ago, maybe 3, that we would have been expelled, except the university professor said if they kicked us out, they were going to go on strike. And that wouldn't, and it was getting on in the spring, and that wouldn't have been too good to have the professors go on strike. And then,
so you parted ways.
I parted ways.
And you head up to.
This is where the professor.
The
pop quiz man.
You want to talk about the pop quiz?
Yeah, I like that story.
Tell the pop quiz story.
Well, one of my professors was infamous for his pop quizzes. And And I told him we were thinking of having another demonstration, and if I were in jail, and he gave a pop quiz, could I make it up when I get out of jail? And he laughed at me and said, "Oh no, I'll bring it down to the jail cell. You can't cheat in there." You know,
Yeah.
great sense of humor.
Yeah.
He thought he had a good sense of humor. He laughed.
So this is 1960, and after those sit-ins, so this starts with 4 students in Greensboro, North Carolina, February 1st, and within just a matter of months, it becomes 70,000 students in 53 cities in about 11 states. And in the spring of 1960 is when the founding of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, takes place. And the group asks you, some of the leadership from the group says, can you go up to, if you're going to go back up to DC, can you check in on what's going on with the Howard University students? We haven't heard from them since that meeting.
And this is before,
Everyone knows.
ENET, all
Everyone
that
knows.
jazz. Everyone knows.
Everyone knows the internet was not around when you were a kid.
I was an adult.
You were 18.
That's an adult.
So you go up to Howard University.
I go up to Howard. I didn't quite know where it was. And I was asking around campus, anybody involved in sympathy pickets for the students down in the South. And no, there weren't. But there was a group planning a sit-in. And they got word of me, and they invited me to come to their meeting. I forget if it was that night or, a couple nights down the road. And so they were not only planning a sit-in and happy to have someone with a little experience, but they were planning to have sit-ins in Arlington, Virginia, where I grew up. So my hometown, I got into some good trouble. And we sat in here and we sat in there and at the lunch counters and a couple restaurants. Some of you might remember Hot Chops and Howard Johnson's. The old folks might remember those chains of places. I see a gentleman nodding his head there. Sounds familiar. And then we took a break for about a week so the managers and the local officials could talk about it. And we didn't hear anything from them. So we went and sat in again and got served. Shock and awe. Turns out the prosecuting attorney for Arlington said he wasn't going to enforce the state law, which required that not only the people who sat together, but whoever enabled them, whether it was a church minister or park ranger or manager of a restaurant, what have you, they could be arrested too. Well, most of these managers at the lunch counters and things, they were from liberal New York Jewish families that had founded the business, and they personally had no problem with serving us, but they weren't ready to go to jail. So once the threat of jail was removed, we ate. And then all the surrounding jurisdictions, they said, well, if Arlington's not going to enforce the state law, we aren't either. And that took care of eateries in Northern Virginia.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's important to note as well is that Greensboro didn't change Arlington, Virginia. Arlington changed Arlington.
Yeah.
Right.
And I helped.
And you helped. You know, a few more things around town, in D.C. and in Maryland and so forth, up into Baltimore. And then the Freedom Rides happened.
Yep.
And I'm going to play this video for that.
Okay. I'll shut up.
This was an idea that caught the imagination of the country. However, the civil rights community thought it was a bit of a lark. They thought, oh, right, we're just going to ride on buses through the South, for a couple of months. It was almost seen as like a vacation. And some of the people who actually participated initially were viewed as, people who were just, slackers. They didn't want to do the hard work of going and demonstrating in front of, hardcore places, so they were just going to take a bus.
I think we knew from the start it could be dangerous. On the other hand, maybe to break the tension, maybe half thinking it, we were teasing Hank and that, here you're going off on this all expense paid vacation. Good way to end the semester, buddy.
How I spent my summer in 1961. Let me tell you the ways.
They put together a small group of 13 riders, I think it was 13, who left Washington on 2 separate buses, making their way through the Upper South. In the Upper South, they were attacked a few times. A couple of people were beaten up, arrested, most notably in Rock Hill, South Carolina. But really all hell broke loose when they got to Alabama.
And all of a sudden, it made national news, and everybody realized this was not just a walk in the park. This was the next stage of the revolution.
I had already had a taste. I had seen the violence. I just barely escaped the Klan. So I had no illusions whatsoever about what was going to happen next. I didn't know anything about Anniston, Alabama, and then we were told that we are literally going into the belly of the beast. Anniston was a hotbed of Klan activity. And as a matter of fact, Jim Farmer, who was a pretty good stump speaker, spoke that night and told a joke about Anniston in terms of foretelling what we were going to be in for it. He said there was this bus driver driving a Greyhound bus, and as he got maybe 3 or 4 miles from Anniston, he heard this knock-knock thumping on the side of the bus, so he pulled over to see what it was, and as he opened the door, the Greyhound had gotten down off of the side of the bus and wanted to come inside. And so he asked, he says, why do you want to do that? He said, we getting ready to go into Anniston. And there are variations of that joke of, he said, one preacher said, Lord, we're getting ready to go down to Alabama and we want you to be with us. And there was silence. And he said, Lord, did you hear me? I want you to be with us. So he heard that voice, I'll go with you as far as Anniston. So all kinds of joke about how dangerous it was going to be. And surely enough, when we got maybe a few miles outside of Anniston, we'd all had been singing on the bus, and as we did that from time to time. A bus coming from Anniston stopped on the opposite side of the highway, and the 2 bus drivers got out and spoke. And the driver of our bus got back on and kind of looked at us and just kind of smiled. As we got into Anniston, the streets were deserted. No one. And it was telling us this is not good.
A mob firebombed the bus as churchgoers brought their children to watch the Freedom Riders burn alive on Mother's Day. Riders were able to escape, only to be beaten with baseball bats until the local authorities finally stepped in. Freedom Riders were attacked 2 more times in Birmingham and Montgomery, where it appeared things would come to an end. But a call back to my mother in D.C. to send more riders, and a team led by Diane Nash in Nashville, re-energized everyone. However, my mother and the Freedom Riders were now entering Mississippi, a place many would call the heart of darkness. So you had this, there was a unique phone call that took place in Montgomery. The church is surrounded by the Klan and
Tear gas is coming in through the
Dr. King is there.
Broken windows from people had thrown stones at the church windows and broken them. Yeah, and so nobody was going to go home, so each family unit could make a call that was timed, like 2 or 3 minutes, I forget which, to let folks know they wouldn't be home, but they were safely in the church. Well, Paul Dietrich called me and said, pretty much literally, Joan, this is Paul. I can't talk. We're trapped in a church in Montgomery. Send more riders. So I made a few phone calls around the Howard University group, and I got 5 of us together, including my buddy for the rest of my life, Stokely Carmichael, a.k.a. Kwame Ture, you know, the Black Power guy. But so we flew to New Orleans, and we joined where we met up with a few other folks, I think about 4 or 5 more, and we took the train headed for Chicago, the Illinois Central, and got off in Jackson and went into one of the waiting rooms. And Captain Ray walked us in. Move on and move out. Y'all hear me? You gonna do it? You're under arrest. So I was out to the paddy wagon. And the one thing that gave me hope, officer, was when I went to step out of that paddy wagon, a big step, and I'm just a little, short thing. He took my arm to help me down, the officer did, and said, "We don't want anything to happen to you, chillin'." And that gave me faith that in the end, it was all going to work out. And it did. We went off to the county jail, no, the city jail, then the courtroom, then the county jail. And it got so crowded in the county jail. In the white women's cell, we had less than 3 square feet of floor space per person. And I don't mean 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. I mean 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, which made sleeping in a little cozy. A few slept under the bunks, and one girl always slept curled up in the dripping shower stall. So finally, they took the prisoners on death row at the most notorious prison in the country, Parchman, and put the death row prisoners out doing field work with the regular prisoners, and they put us up on death row. And they were hoping to scare us, but it didn't scare me because I'm a Southerner too. And man, it was roomier, it was cleaner, and the food was just so much better without that added protein from the bugs on the floor, And so...
and it's where you learn to drink coffee.
That's where I learned to drink coffee. Coffee with chicory, which I haven't been able to find around here. But Southern style, French Huguenot coffee. You can get it in South Africa.
Okay.
Why can't you get it in Utah?
Okay, Mom. So, but you said it was roomier. So the county jail, in a jail cell that maybe was supposed to hold 3 to 4 people, how many people were in there?
31.
31. Yeah, that's a little cozy.
Yeah. And they were all Yankees and didn't quite know how to talk the way I understood. And finally, we got one other white Southern woman in there. Oh, I was so happy.
But now, meanwhile, so you're on death row and Parchman prison for about, what, 2.5 months?
2.5 months. Free room and board for the summer, can't complain.
Right. But you had been accepted, and we're going to, this very abbreviated version of the story, but you've been accepted to Tougaloo College, an HBCU.
Yep.
And this was on the suggestion of probably John Lewis.
Probably. Good trouble guy.
Yeah, because you had this idea that integration should go both ways. It shouldn't just be a bunch of black students catching hell, to quote you. And that, maybe you should go to a black school. And John said, well, why don't you go to Mississippi? The students haven't done anything there, meaning sit-ins.
Sending this white girl to Mississippi to help organize the black students for demonstrations, crazy as it comes.
Well, John was pretty crazy. He's pretty visionary. But, so you go down there. But now you're in Parchman, and you go to Tougaloo, your first night.
Oh, his favorite story.
Yes.
Well, I was a little extra pale from, the summer, out of the sun. And Mother Nature called me in the middle of the night. Back then, as some of you may remember, the restrooms were down in the middle of the hallway. And so I was tiptoeing down the hallway. Lights were very dim. I had on this little pale, what we called shorty sleeping garment. And Mother Nature had called a girl at the other end of the hall, and she was tiptoeing down, and she saw me, and she screamed bloody murder. She thought she was seeing a ghost. Well, she startled me, and I screamed back at her, but Mother Nature won, and we both made it to the restroom. And I think by morning, everybody in that dorm knew there was a white girl upstairs.
Yeah. And this was pretty controversial. I mean, having you there on this black campus, the state of Mississippi actually tried to shut down the school.
Yeah, but the school charter was older than the segregation laws.
Right. So you're there at the campus, Dr. King shows up, you got to meet him. Yeah, I'm just brushing over Dr. King, yes. But you guys had a particular feeling about Dr. King. I'm going to talk about that for a moment. As students, you saw Dr. King a little differently.
Yeah. We thought he was an excellent spokesperson for the movement. You know, he could take our message nationwide very nicely, very well. But he just wasn't involved in enough direct action to suit us. He needed to get out there and do more.
Yeah. Well, and then I Have a Dream. I mean, that speech you...
Oh, that pie in the sky dream. That was not my... It was not a call to action. It was just pie in the sky dreaming. And the speeches had all been censored ahead of time. They had to hand in a copy and get it censored so that they didn't offend the Kennedys. John Lewis had to take out a section about we're going to march nonviolently through the South like Sherman marched through Georgia. That was too radical. But that whole I Have a Dream thing was not part of the approved speech. It was just a spontaneous add-on type thing.
Yeah.
And speech after the Selma to Montgomery March, how long, not long, that was a call to action. I like that one.
Yeah, and this would be August 28th, 1963, and I Have a Dream. Prior to that is May 28th, 1963, and this is a seminal moment in Mississippi. And I'm going to play this section here.
Okay. I'll shut up.
This new movement would explode on May 28th, 1963, when John Salter and Medgar Evers took the Jackson boycott to the next level. In all, 14 people would participate in what would become one of the most famous and violent sit-ins of the civil rights movement.
I've heard at various times from the reporter, the cameraman, and the son of one of the reporters that this was the most terrifying, frightening event they covered in the civil rights movement. Now, guess they weren't in Birmingham or Montgomery with the Freedom Riders, but they got around, and this to them was the worst.
When the three individuals, Perlina Lewis, Memphis Norman, and Ann Moody, sat down at the white counter, nothing happened. Now, Joan, interestingly, was not supposed to be part of this demonstration.
And he said, well, let's go check in what's happening at Woolworth.
They had no idea that this environment had turned volatile until they walked in the store. And it was right at that moment that a thug, a former police officer, had come in and pulled Memphis Norman, the one black male, off of his stool, knocked him onto the floor, and began kicking him mercilessly. Joan was then stuck in the situation wondering what's going to happen next. Ann Moody had been pulled off of her stool and thrown against some of the counters. Perlina Lewis was also pulled from the stool and was down on her knees right by the counter when the police officer came on the scene. Both of them rushed back to the counter, and so that the demonstration would continue. Joan sees all this and realizes, first of all, she is beginning to communicate with the demonstrators. She sees a man with a knife walk by Ann Moody, and she calls out, Annie, he's got a knife. And all of a sudden she's identified with the people at the counter. Who's this white girl talking to those black girls, you know? So all of a sudden she realizes that she's in danger.
But then I sat down. That's when I became a problem.
She walked through that mob in the Woolworth store. And they realized, of course, immediately where she stood.
She joins Perlina and Annie at the counter, the first white to join the demonstration. And at this, the crowd is just incensed. They become like hornets. They start screaming at her.
I went immediately to the lunch counter to sit with Joan and Annie Moody.
When Salter joined, the crowd turned violent. He was knocked in the back of his head with brass knuckles. There was a student who put his cigarette out on the back of Salter's neck. There were several cigarette, and you can still see it to this day. If you look on the back of his neck, he has scars in the shape of a cigarette. They threw pepper and water mixture into his eyes. Things were just going out of control. And at that point, Joan has said that she believed that they were not going to make it out alive. None of them were going to make it out alive.
But here I am.
So what are they actually pouring on your head there?
Oh, they're pouring sugar on my head, as I like to say, like I wasn't sweet enough already. But, and I want to say that is the most used sit-in photo in the world. And it's probably the most integrated sit-in because Professor Salter is a Native American tribal member. I'm white, Annie's black. We didn't have any Asian American students on campus that semester, or we might have really rounded it out. Yeah. We did pretty good.
So you were actually, there was another demonstration taking place, a picket line down the street as a diversion, and you were what was called a spotter. So you blended in because you were white into the crowd and reported back to Medgar's office because they got arrested. Meg Grevers, the field secretary of the NAACP. And then you, like, well, let's go see what's going on at Woolworths.
There were two of us spotters.
Yeah. So you go through this mob. How many people? There's about a couple, 300 people in the mob. Yeah. And then that's when you see what's taking place, and you sit down. And then,
well, it was safer to sit down than go outside where a mob was forming.
Right. And so they grab you by the hair and then pull you out of the store. This guy
to the door, yeah.
To the door. Well, in this case, your case was out, because then outside is all the police, and they arrest the guy who's dragging you out, because they're thinking, well, she can't do anything. She's this sweet little thing, right?
Yeah.
So they let you free, and you go back through the mob again.
We went back to the counter. It was safer.
Yeah. So what were you? A lot of people are wondering, what were you guys talking about at the counter? Because this is going on for a couple, 3 hours.
Went on for about 3 hours. Well, Annie and I were teasing Professor Salter that final exam, that wasn't fair. You didn't cover all that in class. How could you ask us questions about it? And at other times we were just cracking jokes, and sometimes we were praying.
Yeah. But you actually believe that you all were going to make that out.
Yeah, but it's better to die for something you believe in than get hit crossing the street, you know, with the light while you're in the crosswalk. You can still get hit and killed. You're going to die sometime. May as well be for something good.
6 minutes.
We're getting the signal. I'm talking too much.
No, you're doing fine. You're doing fine. I just want to make sure we end properly on time on it. So there's another clip that I was going to show of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. But the entire film you can actually watch on YouTube. Just type in An Ordinary Hero, and it's right there.
We're going to have questions?
No, we're not going to do questions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay.
Okay.
We have 15 minutes? I thought you just said 6 minutes.
Sorry, it's 1-5.
Oh, 1-5. Well, when you do that, that means 6. This is 15. Oh, well, never mind. So, I will show this. So, the March on Washington. Now, 1963 was, most people think of the March on Washington, this kind of banner year and Kumbaya.
Oh, no.
But
there was fire hoses and police dogs put on the demonstrators in Danville, Virginia, then later in Birmingham, Alabama, and
then Medgar.
Well,
the sit-in and then Medgar.
The sit-in, and then Medgar Evers was killed, and then the President of the United States was shot to death in Dallas.
Yeah.
So the one good moment in all that year was that March on Washington.
Yeah. And then right after the March on Washington, maybe 2 weeks, the day after your birthday, as a matter of fact, is the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing.
Yeah.
And I want to show this segment. The opening of this is a gentleman named Jerry Mitchell. He's an investigative reporter.
And he's still doing it.
Still doing it in Mississippi. He's responsible for bringing these people who thought, these Klansmen and so forth, who thought they got away with murder, these cold cases. So Medgar Evers, Vernon Dahmer, the 16th Street Baptist Church bomber, and Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner's killer.
Yeah.
But he's just an amazing individual. He's got a phenomenal book out.
And he takes me out to eat every time I'm in Jackson.
Yes, he does. That's always nice too. Yeah. But let me share this clip. And two of the people in the film you're going to see that are having this discussion were your roommates at Tougaloo College.
Yeah.
Joyce and Dory Ladner.
And my sorority sisters.
On September 15th, 1963, tragedy would befall the most innocent of victims in the battle for racial equality, when a bomb exploded at the 16th Street Baptist Church.
We've all seen the footage of people getting sprayed by the water hoses and things like that. Well, that was the protests that were going on at that time, and they were essentially being staged from the 16th Street Baptist Church because it was a downtown church, and they could gather there and then leave from there for their protest. And so that's what was happening. Well, the Klan didn't like that, so what they did is they planted a bomb underneath the steps on the side of that church, and it blew up at about 10:22 in the morning. In fact, these girls were getting ready. There was a youth service that morning, and in fact, the title of the lesson was called "The Love That Forgives." And the bomb blew up and killed those 4 girls.
Time for sadness. There was nothing to celebrate. Glass that we picked up out of the gutters at the 16th Street Baptist Church. The day that 3 of the little girls who had been blown up there were buried. And the police shot over the heads of the people who came out of the church to disperse the mob, right?
We attended the funeral. We were standing outside, and we were going to follow the cortege until Ed King and Diane Nash pointed and showed us the National Guard standing with guns aimed down at us in the streets. The National Guard, who had been nationalized by the President of the United States, had rebel flags on their uniforms. Mm-hmm. And I was holding this American flag, which was not liked. They just fell in love with the American flag recently in the South. And so this flag was a sign of resistance that I was holding. So you could see them standing all up around with the guns drawn.
Where were they, on top of the church?
Yeah, all around.
I didn't look up at it.
And so Ed and Diane said, look, 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 look. The same way they did at Medgar's funeral in Jackson when John Doe came out and started screaming, yelling, said, you must stop because they're going to shoot you, pointing to the guns aimed at people in the streets there on Ferry Street. It would have been like Sharpeville Massacre.
I'm not sure they were going to shoot us.
Oh,
we were standing.
You're not sure?
No. The church, you're talking about during the time the funeral was going on?
Yes, ma'am. They had just blown the church up, Joyce.
Yeah, but
what makes you think they
Martin
wouldn't
Luther
shoot
King was inside.
So he was killed.
The funeral.
He was killed.
Listen, let me speak, please. Will you indulge me a little?
That's just the way they were in college.
No, there were a lot of people standing in front of that church. And I don't know whether they were going to shoot or not, but if there was any restraint to be had on that day, they would have had it. We bring from these experiences different feelings, impressions, and so on.
Well, this is reality I'm dealing with.
So I would have been shot too.
Yes, ma'am.
So what was that experience like being there?
Well, a VW busload of us had gone over from Tougaloo to the funeral of the 3 girls, and on the way back, we were still in downtown Birmingham. The police stopped us. Well, the driver's husband, Matt Herron, was a well-known freelance photographer, and he was following us in another car. So when we got stopped, he stopped behind us and came up to the police and asked them why they weren't out looking for the church bombers. And the police said, well, that's why we stopped them. So Matt held up his camera and said, unless you want to see yourself in the centerfold of Life magazine, which was a big deal then, that magazine, you'll let them go now. So they let us go. But we were sort of afraid that they would call their Klan buddies on that narrow two-lane road that went back to Jackson. This was before the interstates. And so we went to the Gadsden Motel, which was the only place like that blacks could go, and part of our group was black. And so I slept in Andrew Young's bed that night. Dr. King, the motel was booked solid, but Dr. King's party had 2 rooms, and they gave up one of them. So along with probably 2 other girls, I slept in Andrew Young's bed while he was probably sleeping on the floor over in Dr. King's room. A pretty good story.
You mentioned the Klan. You were on the Klan's most wanted list.
Oh, yeah.
And in 1964, they actually tried to kill you to stop Freedom Summer.
Yeah.
This drive to Freedom Summer was the drive to register black voters in Mississippi. In the last few minutes we have, can you share a bit of that story?
Well, we had a car and everybody in it was white that had gone over to Canton, Mississippi, which was such a tough town that white civil rights workers did not go there by general agreement. But there was a big mass meeting and we decided to go. And
So
anyway.
you didn't want to listen, is what you're saying?
What?
You didn't want to follow the rules?
Of course not.
All right.
Why would I do that? But, so we left at the end of the meeting before the curfew went into effect, and we were on the little on-ramp from the old road to the brand new interstate, and we got boxed in by a couple of cars. And the thing is, the week before, the leader of the opposition party in the legislature of the country of India had been arrested going to a restaurant in full Indian attire in support of the blacks in Mississippi. And he had been arrested, and this had not gone over well with the Indian embassy in Washington, who had complained to the State Department, and the State Department contacted the powers that be down in Jackson that they were not to mess with the Indians. Well, Hamid, the driver of the car, was from Pakistan, and the 2 countries were virtually in a state of war. But we started yelling, "Don't hit him. He's an Indian. He's an Indian." And Hamid said, "I'm not an Indian. I'm from Lahore, Pakistan." And somebody said, and the mob said, "What's that?" And we said, "It's a big city in India." India. And I guess somebody in the mob was in the power structure, so they let us go. And now the governor of Mississippi had said that there was no violence. And if there was in the state, he wanted to be the first to know about it. So we took Hamid, dripping blood, up the marble steps of the governor's mansion to let him know that there was a little violence. But the doorman wouldn't let us in. Then we took Hamid to the hospital to get sewn up and all. But yeah, that's the closest I came to death by the Klan, but because I wasn't killed, 2 of my friends were. A few weeks later in Freedom Summer, Cheney and Schwerner.
Yeah, the 3 civil rights activists that were killed.
And Goodman was too. So I still feel like since they aren't here to do their part, and I am here to do mine, I have to do a little bit extra in support of them.
So 84 years old, you're still doing it.
I'm still doing it. Still got you trapped in here listening to me.
I remember asking you once, are you a hero? And you said, well, no, absolutely not. I said, are you, what makes you so special?
I'm not special.
Yeah, he said, absolutely nothing. I just saw something was wrong and decided to do something about it, that we just have to make the choice. But we can all make that choice.
We can all make that choice. So you all get out there and cause some good trouble, like my old buddy John Lewis said.
Yeah. And thank you.
Well, thank you for listening to me.
So we would like to remind you that